Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by the Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Mogatz. Today, we are going to ask, and possibly answer, the question, is originality dead? We'll also delve into the questions of what purpose does originality serve in the art room, and what can we do as teachers to ensure that our students are being original. Andrew McCormick, my Art Ed Radio co-host, will join us in just a few minutes to answer these questions and talk about how we are dealing with originality in our classrooms to set our students up for success. Let's begin with our big question. Is originality dead? I would say that it may not be dead yet, but it is certainly on its last throes of life. We see that fact manifest itself all the time in our art room. Without support and without scaffolding, kids seem to revert to the most cliche, most overdone subjects that you can ever think of. And part of that, I think, is because we prefer the familiar and the comfortable in our life, okay? Both teachers and students alike. But honestly, if we can break away from that, that is what makes a new original work so much more satisfying. But that raises the question, how do we get kids to that point? Okay, for me, I think that while kids may not have new ideas for subject matter, they definitely can have a personal voice or a personal take on something that already exists. And it may seem like kind of a daunting task, but there are really good ways to have students make it their own. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But, that is a mantra that really runs through my art room all 4 years the kids are in school with me at the high school level. I always tell kids when they bring me an idea, how can you make it your own? And I really do a lot of work to encourage that original voice and that original take on something, even if it does already exist. Now, one incredible video that works as a great resource for my classroom that I can share with you is called Everything is a Remix by Kirby Ferguson. Basically, it is a little mini documentary that talks about how everything that's done in the creative world, whether it be music, film, art, whatever, has already been done before. Okay? And everything has been done so often that you're not going to be able to find anything original. And it starts with a little bit of hip hop history, okay, which my kids really get into, but it talks about a lot of old hip hop songs, a lot of old rap songs that are sampling the same beat or the same bass line over and over and over again. And even if they're just doing it once or twice at the beginning, it eventually gets sampled over and over and over again by dozens of songs throughout decades, honestly. And it talks about classic rock with Led Zeppelin and how they take from earlier songs. Then once Led Zeppelin has created this, then bands after that have taken from them. And like we said, things have been done so often and so many times, it's very, very difficult to find anything original. Okay? And he also dives into a little bit about, filmmaking with Quentin Tarantino and all the influences he brings into his movies, and Star Wars and everything they've taken from old movies to kind of make it what it is. Okay? And it all comes back to that point where some things are originally being copied, and even if they aren't being copied intentionally, you can still probably find someone else who did it first. And Ferguson comes to the point where he says that trying to be original is basically futile. And it's not because we don't have the capacity to be creative, but just because everyone has been influenced by everything and inspired by everything that has come before. And the opportunity just isn't there to come up with those original ideas. But when we take that into account, if we have that in mind when we're dealing with our classroom, is it fair to our students to expect them to come up with original ideas? How do we have students make it their own? And for me, it comes down to 3 different ideas. Okay, appropriation, transformation, and subversion. And I want to tell you just a little bit about how I kind of use some of these terms, or why I may stay away from some of these terms and concepts and ideas in my classroom. Like for me, appropriation is really, really difficult to teach, and it's even more difficult for my students to understand. Because of that, I generally will stay away from it in my classroom. Because with appropriation, always comes the concept of recontextualization. And that is not a concept that's easily understood by my students. It's tough for them to realize that if we're appropriating something, all of a sudden it has a new context and a new meaning. And they're just looking at it saying, that's exactly the same as it was before. Like, how is that not copying? And it's really tough for them to wrap their minds around it. So, like I said, that's something that I kind of stay away from. Hey, transformation, on the other hand, it's not something I like. I think it can be done all right in the classroom, but I think you're kind of walking a fine line because you're kind of running that risk of just flat out copying. Like, you need to make sure if you're trying to transform something, hey, that you can change it enough to make it original. Like, is it advanced thinking if your students are just changing the materials or just changing the format? Hey, if you're doing the exact same image, like, what are students really learning? Hey, you really need to kind of dive deep into that concept of transformation and really not just change the materials, but attempt to try and change the meaning of what's out there. And again, that's something that can be difficult for students. So as a teacher, I think you kind of need to walk a fine line if you're jumping into the transformation. Now, for me, the way to go is really subversion. And if you can take a general idea and kind of flip it on its head and try and look at things in a new way, that's a great way to go. I love to take traditional portraits and try and do new things with them. Right now in my classroom, we're working on the portraits where kids smash their face against the window and draw themselves with distorted features. And, I have a ton of projects that do similar things like that, where you take a traditional idea, but kind of flip it on its head and do something new with it. And if you can subvert that original idea, I think that's one way for kids to have an original take or an original approach to something that's always traditionally done. And I think if you can do that, you're hoping to create some original thoughts. Kids can take your ideas and run with them. And I think that originality is one of the keys to a really successful art room. And that goes for both the students and the teacher. We obviously want our kids to come up with original ideas. But we need to ask ourselves, what am I doing not only to present original ideas myself, but what am I doing to encourage kids to come up with their own original ideas? And I think a lot of that comes back to, can we solve that problem? Can we present those original ideas by creating good lessons, good prompts, good themes, whatever it may be? If you can allow kids to sort of think in divergent answers, like if you have a project that can spread out and take a lot of different approaches, that's where you're going to, approach that idea of originality. And if you can get your kids to be thinking in a lot of different ways, that's where that originality is going to come from. But as I'm thinking about a lot of these ideas and a lot of these questions, I really do want to run them by my friend Andrew McCormick. I'm going to try and get him on here. He's big into STEAM education. He loves Lego competitions, gardening, and he's got a great goatee. And honestly, I can't think of anybody better to have on the show to discuss originality. So now, please welcome to the show, Mr. Andrew McCormick. You probably know him from all of our time co-hosting AOE Live together. He is an 8th and 9th grade art teacher in Cedar Falls, Iowa. And Andrew, you're going to be with me a lot, but for the first time, welcome. How are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing good. It's nice to be back in the saddle podcasting with you. We took a little bit of time off, and we're ready to relaunch this thing and do it up hopefully a little bit better technical and audio-wise. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Good. I'm pretty excited about it. And like we said, listeners, get used to us being together, because more often than not, it's going to be Andrew and I co-hosting these shows. So anyway, today we're talking about originality. And Andrew, specifically, I wanted to talk about the article that you wrote back in September on The Art of Ed called "How Important is Originality in the Art Room?" And I love the article. And I know you talked a lot about, all the decisions we make in the art room and, where does originality fall in sort of that spectrum? Like if we're trying to get kids to create work,
Mm-hmm.
okay, how important is originality? Like, would you rather have kids stuck with, that idea of this has to be original, or would you rather them just kind of start making something, even if it wasn't the most original? Like, does that do a good job sort of summarizing your point that you
Yeah,
were trying to make
totally.
there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a conundrum. And I think, sometimes we run into art teachers and teachers in general, or parents or students who kind of think that originality and craft have to be, or originality and skill even have to be on opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think you and I would both agree that, that notion of either or is kind of, it's a fallacy. It can't be that. But it is it's something that we have to weigh and take into consideration, because I know that I have had plenty of students who get so kind of derailed and see the obstacles of, oh, this has to be original, this has to be creative, and they haven't had a whole lot of practice and a whole lot of scaffolding in other classes in being original. And then all of a sudden, here you are as, an art teacher, whether you're middle school, high school, elementary, saying, all right, on Tuesday, 45 minutes, be totally original right now. And some kids are just
Yeah.
like, wow, like overwhelmed by those choices. So, now there are some students who are completely ready for that. Every
Right. Right.
open-ended assignment you give them, they're going to knock out the park, and they're going to the beat of their own drum, and they're original 24/7. And then you have some other kids who took art, and are taking art, and they struggle with that, and to lower the bar of that obstacle, I think can really help a lot of kids just get going. There's this great video out there that has Chuck Close talking for about 5 minutes, and he has a quote in there, and I'll probably butcher it, and we could throw a link on there that people could check it out. He says, it's not. He doesn't say that originality is overrated, but inspiration is overrated. He said,
Right.
you know, art is just about showing up and doing the work. And I think
Yeah.
we have this myth about being inspired and being taken away by the spirit of inspiration. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
man, sometimes like you just got to do it. You got to get down to work. So,
Yeah.
I would love in an ideal world for every student I ever work with to be 100% original all the time. But we just know that's not the case. And if you can lower that bar, some kids, just like Chuck Close said, like they just start doing work and they get into it. And then through the working, through the hands, through the touching of clay, the manipulating paint, they start to make choices and decisions that they weren't going to make if they never got out the starting block, because they were so, frustrated with that originality kind of hurdle, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, okay, I think the Chuck Close quote, I'm going off the top of my head here, I think it's amateurs sit around and wait for inspiration. The rest of us just show up and get to work.
Holy
And
cow. Did you pull that off the top of your head, or did you
yeah,
Google that?
well, it's a quote I really, really like.
Yeah. Well, thanks for one-upping me. As I bring this video up, you're like, actually, you did it all wrong. But yeah,
no, I'm
I
not.
love that quote. It's so great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to show up you up here, but no, I think that's an important thought. And so, I guess my question for you then is: do you see copying as part of a strategy? Like, can that be part of scaffolding to really help your students work toward that idea of originality? Is that something that they need to go through first?
Oh man, that's such a good question, because like copying has such a like dirty connotation, right?
Yeah, it
And
does.
and the same with like tracing, like, oh my
Hmm.
God, tracing. Um, I don't know that I like the word copying. Maybe we can talk about like a more teacher guided exercise, right? So I
Yeah.
can even make it applicable to my classroom right now. I'm starting a new semester. I mean, I'm day one into it. And one of the first projects I want to do is really open ended. And I just thought, you know, I've been experimenting with choice a whole lot lately. And to
Hmm.
some degree, I feel like there's been a dip in some of the quality of some of the work. Like when I've
Right.
been steering the ship, I kind of knew how to get the results I wanted out of the kids, but they weren't getting, they weren't putting their own spin and flavor on it. I was kind of directing it too much. So I thought, I kind of want my cake and I want to eat it too. So I've thought about, what if I did a week-long little mini exercise or project that was really like, we're all going to kind of do it like this. So we learn some skills. Now you might say that that's copying. If it looks like teachers exercise, then you did a really good job and you get an A. But I just don't think I would weight it and think as much of it as then once we're done with that week-long exercise, that project, when I then turn them loose and say, well, now you've got this kind of big idea to grapple with, and I've walked you through this exercise to possibly use, or maybe you go somewhere else. So that's what I've been thinking about scaffolding. Give them something small, quick, fast, that is very much skill related, and then move on to something that's a little more open-ended so they feel confident in the skills that they have acquired, and then they can move on to that more open-ended original thing. And some of those kids who struggle with originality can fall back and kind of do an imitation of that exercise. Okay,
Right.
fine. I was up late a couple nights ago and I wrote this like long rant about grading and differentiation in the classroom. And I likened it to, lifting weights in the gym, right? You have some students who are, I know it's a totally logical analogy, right?
No, I'm into this. I want to know where this is going.
So you have some students who are maybe naturally strong, let's say physically strong, and they go to the gym and they're lifting really heavy weights and they're maxing out and they're exhausted. Then you have another kid who shows up, a little more string bean, a little more scrawny. They're lifting much lighter weights, but also equally exhausted at the end of the workout, right? And that's what art is. You have some students who are naturally gifted, and they're going to naturally push themselves to make something that is like right up to the limit of what they can kind of handle and are ready to do. And then you have the students who struggle with originality, and I hate to say the weaker students, but in the analogy, you know what I mean. They may not make as original artwork, but for them, they were also exhausted at the end of the process. So while the artwork might look totally different, and you might say, well, on my fancy rubric here, this kid gets a 5 out of 5 on originality, and you drew a picture of LeBron James from the internet, and that's not very original. But for that student, that was about all that they could handle. So the weights look different, but the level of work and exertion is exactly the same. So,
all right. Yeah, I think that's a good analogy. I like that.
No, I'm sure I lost everybody on that. They were just like, what the heck is he talking about? Lifting weights and LeBron James. But that is one of the things I love about teaching art is I do feel like it lends itself to a really easy, organic self-differentiation. Kids who are just naturally talented are going to find ways to push themselves, and kids that struggle are also going to find ways to push themselves.
Yeah, and I think that's good. I want to delve into that a little bit more. But before we do that, since we're talking about choice, I do want to take this chance to let everyone know that this episode is brought to you by AOE's online course, Choice-Based Art Education. If you're in need of grad credits or professional hours and you want to learn more about offering more choice to your students, consider taking Choice-Based Art Education. The class will cover a variety of educational pedagogy that offer choice and allow you to design a plan that works for you. The class is worth 3 credits and runs for 5 weeks, with classes starting on the 1st of each month. Learn more by going to theartofed.com and clicking on the Classes tab. Hey, now, Andrew, jumping back into that idea about choice, and you talked about sort of that self-selective differentiation. Do you think that allowing choice in your classroom can encourage creativity? Like, do kids sort of find their niche with the more choice that you give them?
I might actually shock you with my answer here. I think it's a like net zero gain. Like some kids are gonna push themselves and some kids aren't,
Right.
I think when I first started adopting a more choice-based and tab approach, although I'm definitely more choice-based, I would say, I kind of felt like it was like the fix-all, cure-all, and boy, every kid's gonna be engaged.
Yeah.
I still had to work pretty hard to get kids engaged,
Yeah.
I've always found like the kids who are good anyway, we're going to really run with it.
Yeah.
They might run further with it, and it did help out the kids who maybe lack some motivation or originality, but it
Mm-hmm.
didn't completely make them into like rock stars overnight because they have no sort of I keep saying the word scaffolding, but they have no sort of like understanding or practice at being original. So
Right.
this happened this happened to me, and it's happened to a lot of other teachers that are experimenting with tab and choice. You give students a theme, you give them a topic, the students do some research. Inevitably, they end up on Pinterest and say, "I want to make that. That is
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I want to make." And it's like, in the
Yeah.
whole universe of possibilities, you've chosen something that already exists and you just want to recreate it. That's
Yeah.
not really original. So I don't know. I mean, I think it probably depends on the teacher and how you run your choice. It can definitely help, but you can also fall into the same pitfalls of students just not being original, not thinking, imitating, and kind of grabbing things and just reproducing them. So it can help, but I think it probably depends more on the teacher and how they facilitate it.
Yeah, well, I want to jump in. I want to tell you a little bit about that because I talked in the introduction of this show about how, kids will come to you with those ideas like, oh, I want to do this. And what I always say to them, okay, is how can you make it your own?
Yeah.
Okay, and I repeat that ad nauseum. Like every time they bring me something, I'm like, what can you do to change it? What can you do to better it? What's your original take? What's your voice have to say about this? Okay, and it always just boils down to make it your own. And one of the great things about high school is getting to work with kids year after year after year. And all through that first year, I'm just telling them, make it your own, make it your own. And then the second year, they'll come to me and be like, oh, what about this? And I'm like, what am I going to tell you? And like, make it your own. And then by
Right.
the third and fourth year, they don't even ask anymore.
Right.
And so really, you just sort of have to, I think, keep pushing them toward originality because I think originality is, I guess, inherently a little bit risky, but when you can continue to push kids outside of their comfort zone, they get over that risk and they do start to kind of take those ideas, run with them, and take those things, and they really do find ways to make it their own. So
Yeah.
it may not be it may be just a matter of finding that starting point and then taking it from there, but I think it's possible for all of our kids, with enough effort to start making original work.
Well, and I like that as a mantra to give to kids. Like I'm going to steal that because I had an encounter with a student just a while ago. We had like a week left in the semester, and she had done all her assignments. She was kind of one of those kids who's always done a little
Mm-hmm.
early. And I said, "All right, great. Now you get to, make artwork that like I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not putting any limitations on it. What do you want to make?" And I know we're going to talk about this at some point. Those sort of cliches that as art teachers we see all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah.
I kid you not, it was Pinterest and it was the melted crayon over the boy and the girl and the umbrella. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no. Like I've seen 10,000 people make that same piece of artwork. No. And I said, what would you do to do something similar to that would be unique and not just the same old, thing.
Mm-hmm.
And man, you would have thought I was asking her to like translate the Bible into Portuguese. The look she gave me was just like, what do you mean I can't do this? And it was about a 5-6 minute conversation of like, okay, here's why this is not going to be good. And I've
Right.
seen this from experience. And finally she came up with something that was kind of like in the same wheelhouse, but totally
Mm-hmm.
different and her own and unique. And it was like, you're welcome. You're welcome that I did not allow you to do that crappy unoriginal
Yeah.
idea and kind of pushed you a little bit. So, I just think it's one of those things. I'd never had her in class before, and she was a ninth
Mm-hmm.
grader. And I can imagine, then having her again as a 10th grader or 11th grader, which I don't have the luxury of doing. But I can say,
Right.
like, remember that time you came at me with that really stupid, melted crayon umbrella idea? This is kind of one of those moments. Like you gotta
Yeah.
bring
Yeah.
something a little more original to the table. So but at the same time, if you want kids to be engaged and like artwork, it's like every once in a while you're gonna have some of those. Like, and
Yeah.
it is okay that you don't have 20 students, 8 projects, all 160 projects are 100% original. You're gonna have
Mm-hmm.
some things in there that the kids love where it's like not super original, but if the end result is that they want to keep making, they want to keep exploring, they're building on some successes and some confidences, maybe lowering that bar to originality wasn't such a bad idea every once in a while. I mean, I think everything's in moderation, and you got to weigh into a fact. Okay, if I lower it here, can this kid run with it? And how many times have we kind of lowered the bar for this kid? Maybe I need to add a little resistance to it. So
yeah,
it's a juggling act for sure. Now I'm just mixing metaphors. Now I got weightlifting, juggling, balancing act. What is this? A trapeze? What is this?
No, it works. It works. Somehow you manage to pull it all together and make sense of it all.
I don't know. So I don't know about that.
Yeah. But I think that's a good spot for us to head out on. So, Andrew, thank you very much for joining me on this one. And we'll talk to you again in a couple weeks.
Oh, yeah. My pleasure, man. I like this format. Kind of short and sweet. Get in, get out. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So looking forward to the rest of the season.
Yeah. Going to be good. Thank you.
All right. See ya.
All right. That was a great interview. Love talking to that guy. A few thoughts for you before we go. Originality is something that we should strive for in the art room, but not necessarily something that we're going to get to easily. Like it's really difficult to capture. And, if we go back to the idea from the intro with Kirby Ferguson, everything is a remix, the idea of originality might not even exist. Personally, I disagree with that because I think an original voice can be found in the art room, and we just need to set our students up to be able to find that themselves. Well, that might be the ideas I talked about before with appropriation or transformation or subversion, or even just that mantra of make it your own. Hey, we can take down those roadblocks that Andrew talked about and set our students up for success with, work that may not be completely original, but it's a stepping stone for them. It's a way to get them there. And as long as they're making and they're creating, they will get there eventually. Okay, we may never create something that's truly original, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't give it our best attempt. Okay, the kids in our classroom don't need to reinvent the wheel. They need to embrace what has come before, and they need to speak about it in a personal and powerful way, because they have their own voice, and their own take is what makes things creative, makes things original, and that's what we should strive for in our art room. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. If you want to support the show and enjoy what we're doing, please subscribe on iTunes, leave some comments, and write a review. We especially enjoy and appreciate those 5-star reviews. New episodes of Art Ed Radio will be released every Tuesday, and additional content can be found under the podcast tab on theartofed.com.